Hey there, wake up. It's Means Morning News. Just after 11 a.m. on the East Coast, I'm the newsman, Sam Sachs, and I don't even know. I don't know. Well then, where should we start? I guess on the bright side, Liz Cheney will not be Attorney General. At least that's something. Though it will probably be someone even worse. Because in the end, the election wasn't even that close. Donald Trump secured enough electoral college votes to win the White House. He not only won, but he again exceeded expectations, and he put up his best performance of any election he's been in to date. He is poised to sweep all the battleground states and is currently above 50% in the popular vote. Not only that, he's going to have a Republican majority in the Senate. Control of the House is still undetermined, but Republicans last night were able to pick up 2 seats in the upper chamber, guaranteeing at least a 1-seat majority. And that's likely to grow with races still left to be called that Republicans are leading in. So by the time it's settled, if Republicans run the table on these Senate races, they could have as many as 56 seats in the chamber. Here was Trump on Tuesday night discussing his new mandate.
America has given us an unprecedented and powerful mandate. We have taken back control of the Senate. Wow, that's good.
That sounds ominous. The vaunted gender gap that would propel Vice President Kamala Harris and Democrats to victory never materialized. Women motivated by abortion did break for Harris, but not in unprecedented margins. She won women by 10 points, which is less than what Biden and Hillary Clinton secured. And in battleground states, Harris's lead among women shrank further, spelling doom for the campaign. At the same time, Democratic support among minorities eroded under Harris. She did worse than Biden among Black men and Latino women. And in the biggest demographic shift of the night, Latino men, who Biden won by 23 points in 2020, broke to Trump by 10 points. That's even though Trump has campaigned explicitly on doing mass deportations and human rights abuses that will devastate Latino communities in the U.S. But Harris didn't offer much of an alternative. She moved to Biden's right on immigration, touted her tough record on border prosecutions, and mocked Trump for not building enough of a wall on the southern border. And as Harry Truman said way back in 1952, if it's a choice between a genuine Republican and a Republican in Democratic clothing, the people will choose the genuine article every time. That is, they will take a Republican before they will a phony Democrat. Obviously not a big Truman fan here, but that quote sums up Democratic electoral failures going back decades now. The exit polls also showed a large segment of the electorate motivated by economic hardship. 2/3 of voters said that the economy was not good or poor. 3/4 of voters said inflation had caused them moderate or severe hardship. Trump actually did better than Harris among voters who make less than $100,000 a year. And among voters who said the economy was their number one issue, Trump cleaned up 79% to 20%. Boosters of Bidenomics over the last few years will be confused by this, especially as inflation has eased in recent years. But this chart should help explain the sentiments. It's from the Bureau of Labor Statistics showing real wage growth since 2020. The red line is inflation growth. The two blue lines represent wage growth. The top blue one is nominal wage gains. The bottom one, real wage gains, as in wage gains minus increases in inflation. In Trump's final year in office, thanks mostly to pandemic stimulus programs, earnings for workers far outpaced inflation. But that inverted during Biden, largely for reasons beyond his control: busted supply chains from the pandemic, the war in Ukraine, and excessive profit seeking. And as you can see, from about April 2021, a couple months after Biden took office, to just last summer, real wages were in the negative, as in wages did not keep up with price increases, so workers were struggling to make ends meet with their paychecks. And even though in the last year of the Biden administration, wage growth has finally returned to barely outpacing inflation, it's still not enough to fill in that earnings gap that accumulated during the prior 2 years Biden was in office. Rent, energy, healthcare, groceries all surged in prices, and wages haven't fully caught up yet to those prior increases. And that explains much of the economic discontent, despite the improved inflation numbers in recent months. They're just too little, too late. And as I said, some of the inflation issues weren't Biden's fault, like the problems related to the pandemic and the war in Ukraine. But his administration did make choices to worsen the crisis for workers, because just as prices went up, the Biden White House allowed all the pandemic stimulus programs that kept workers afloat to expire, which led to mass evictions, spike in child poverty, and an unrolling of federal health insurance coverage. Liberals have downplayed the significance of this, claiming that those programs were only meant to be temporary, but their unwinding did cause economic pain for millions. There was also the Federal Reserve's efforts, endorsed by the White House, to weaken the labor market to tame inflation. Interest rate hikes created more hardships for workers by increasing credit card debt and auto loan delinquencies and pushing housing prices even higher. I know on this show we covered this dynamic extensively. To me, this was one of the major stories of the Biden presidency, and we warned Democrats there could be a price to pay for trying to weaken labor power. Well, this is that price. This is what happens when half the policy staff at the White House reads Matt Iglesias. And this is important because liberals will try to obscure what just happened here by claiming that Biden attempted to do progressive economic policy and got punished at the polls for it, thus scaring off future Democratic politicians from doing the same things. But the real reason Biden got punished, or Harris got punished, is for abandoning that progressive economic policy as soon as the ruling class started shrieking about workers having too much power. That, and of course, the ongoing genocide in Gaza. Which brings us to another lesson to be learned from this election, that this guy should have announced 2 years ago he wasn't running for re-election. Joe Biden's selfish refusal to step aside paralyzed the party just as Trump was cruising to the GOP nomination. And by the time Biden made the right decision to drop out, his approval ratings were in the tank, and anyone associated with his administration was stained. The party claimed it was too late to hold any sort of electoral contest or mini primary to pick a new candidate, that everyone just had to fall in line behind Vice President Kamala Harris, who was the politician most closely associated with Biden's unpopular presidency and who had proven herself to be a pretty bad campaigner. Her 2020 presidential run ended before any primary contests even started. Exit polls showed an electorate deeply unsatisfied with the direction of the country, something Harris, who claimed she couldn't think of anything she'd do differently than Biden, could never overcome. I mean, she could have overcome it, but she made a deliberate decision not to because she has bad political instincts. She kept on board Biden's re-election team, which was already flailing, and she never attempted to shore up support among the Democrats' disaffected base. She just hoped that promises of middle-class targeted tax credits and a vague plan to go after price gougers would be enough to satisfy voters upset with the genocide in Gaza and who want to see more done on issues like climate change. The Harris campaign then went after imaginary voters, people like Dobbs dads, Republicans who might vote for Harris to protect their daughters' reproductive rights, and never-Trumper neocons who ideologically agree with Trump on everything but might vote for Harris because he's just too indecent. That was the point of spending the last few weeks campaigning with Liz Cheney. As Harris found out on election night, though, those voters never materialized. Harris is poised to lose Michigan by roughly the same number of votes that were cast during the Democratic primary in protest of Biden's Gaza policy by the uncommitted movement. Harris had months to reach out to those voters to get them back on board, but instead sent Bill Clinton to Michigan in the campaign's final days to lecture them about Israel's biblical claims to the land that justify the ongoing genocide. Harris prioritized supporting Israel's ethnic cleansing in Gaza over defeating the fascist movement on the right here in the U.S. Just a series of poor decisions by the campaign, driven mostly by ideology, that almost makes Hillary Clinton's 2016 run against Donald Trump look halfway competent. As for where things go from here, Democrats will blame the left, as they always do. Party will move to the right, as it was gearing up to do under Harris anyway. And those in the anti-capitalist left who continue to believe there's a viable path to take over the Democratic Party will have to reassess that strategy after yet another devastating loss. The experiment that began in 2014 with the Bernie Sanders campaign to move Democrats left as junior partners in a political coalition has ultimately failed a decade later, with the party choosing genocide in the Cheneys over young Muslim American voters and climate activists, and then going on to suffer its worst electoral defeat in generations. The good news is the Democratic Party isn't the only game in town, and there can be life after a clean break from it. In a related story, United Auto Workers President Shawn Fain is still hard at work getting unions to align their contracts to set up a general strike in 2028. Maybe we should try that instead of partnering with Democrats for another failed election in 4 years. A mixed bag Tuesday night when it comes to state-level ballot measures. On yesterday's show, we ran down some of the major labor, abortion, and drug-related referendums that voters will consider. And here's how it all shook out. First, minimum wage increases and mandatory sick leave policies were approved in Alaska and in Missouri, and paid sick leave was also approved in Nebraska. And voters in Arizona rejected a measure that would have created a reduced minimum wage for tipped workers. Unfortunately, in Massachusetts, an initiative to increase the lower minimum wage for tipped workers was defeated. The state sort of redeemed itself, though, by passing a different measure that allows for gig drivers to unionize. In California, it appears an effort to increase the state's minimum wage to $18 an hour is headed for a defeat, but there are still votes to be counted there. Also headed for a defeat, an effort to amend the Constitution in California to remove the slavery loophole for incarcerated people. That initiative is losing by a fairly large margin, with about half the votes counted. Voters in Nevada, however, did succeed in a similar effort to remove a slavery loophole from their state constitution. When it comes to reproductive health care, a constitutional right to an abortion or expanded access was approved in Arizona, Colorado, Maryland, Nevada, Montana, Missouri, and New York. Similar measures, though, were voted down in South Dakota and in Nebraska. And when it comes to getting high, which, believe me, a lot of people will be feeling the urge to do so this morning, the movement to legalize weed also took a step back. Ballot measures to allow for recreational marijuana use were defeated in South Dakota and in North Dakota. In Nebraska, medicinal marijuana was approved by voters, but in Massachusetts, an initiative to legalize psychedelics was shot down. Finally, we have to talk about what the hell happened in Florida, where a majority of voters approved of measures to both create a constitutional right to an abortion and legalize recreational marijuana. 57% supported the abortion measure and 56% supported weed legalization. Yet both measures failed because they needed a 60% supermajority to pass, which is a higher bar than in most other states and was established at the behest of business interests that argued that a simple majority was just made it too easy for citizens to change state laws. Corporations were like, hey, that's what we're supposed to do, not the people. They took power and then rigged the game to keep power. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu used the cover of American elections to make a major shakeup of his war government. He sacked the defense minister, Yoav Gallant, who has been leading the war effort in Gaza so far. Gallant is also a co-defendant, along with Netanyahu, in a case before the International Criminal Court for carrying out war crimes. Gallant announced last October that the military would purposely violate international law by inflicting maximum punishment on the population in Gaza, saying, quote, I have ordered a complete siege on the Gaza Strip. There will be no electricity, no food, no fuel. Everything is closed. We are fighting human animals and we are acting accordingly. He then did all of that. And despite being potential cellmates at The Hague, Netanyahu still canned him, reportedly because Gallant was ready to strike a deal to end the war, while Netanyahu wants to press on. One tell that this will somehow only make things worse is the Israeli far right is celebrating Gallant's exit. National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir congratulated Netanyahu on the firing and claimed it was, quote, not possible to achieve absolute victory, and the prime minister did well to remove him from his position. Absolute victory. When people like Itamar Ben-Gvir are talking in terms like that, they're envisioning world historic crimes against humanity. The new defense minister is so committed to Israel, his name is literally Israel. Israel Katz will take the reins of the Israeli military establishment. He was previously the foreign minister and contributed to the genocide in Gaza by undermining UNRWA, the UN relief agency operating within the occupied Palestinian territories. Katz also, like Gallant, called for an illegal siege on Gaza, tweeting last year, quote, humanitarian aid to Gaza? No electric switch will be turned on, no water hydrant will be opened, and no fuel truck will enter until the Israeli abductees are returned home, and no one will preach us morals. Real nice guy there. Meet the new genocide heir, same as the old genocide heir. The U.S. weighed in on all of this. The Pentagon press secretary told Al Arabiya News, quote, America's commitment to Israel's security remains ironclad. The U.S. Department of Defense will continue to work closely with Israel's next defense minister. And they referred to Gallant as a trusted partner. A trusted partner. The guy subject to a potential ICC prosecution is a trusted partner. Not sure that's something you want to admit in public. Okay, friends, the show ends today with a sunrise from New Mexico. It was sent in by Steven in Albuquerque amid the balloon fiesta. Enjoy. Thank you, Steven. Show's over. Thanks for watching, and thanks to the team behind the scenes. Please sign up for Means TV, subscribe to our YouTube and podcast channels, and follow us on social media. One day capitalism will fall. Until then, we'll be right here. I'm gonna get some sleep now. I'll see you tomorrow.